My name is Victor Hale. I am 49 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that silence was strength. Not the cowardly kind, the disciplined kind. The kind that lets you observe instead of react, calculate instead of confront. I built my reputation slowly, brick by brick. While others fought for attention, I focused on outcomes. I learned early that people who speak the loudest are rarely the ones holding things together. Real control sits quietly, unnoticed, until it's gone. For years, I was that quiet control. People relied on me without admitting it. Decisions passed through me before they became official. Problems landed on my desk when no one else knew what to do. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't demand authority. I didn't need to. That's what made me dangerous. The betrayal didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with politeness. A scheduled meeting. Neutral faces. Carefully rehearsed language. Words designed to sound respectful while cutting you loose completely. They said the company was evolving. They said my role was no longer aligned. They thanked me for my years of service. I listened. Calmly. Quietly. When you hear betrayal dressed in courtesy, you don't interrupt. You let people finish revealing who they really are. I stood up, shook hands, and walked out without argument. That silence unsettled them. They expected resistance, emotion, maybe even fear. What they got instead was acceptance, and that confused them more than anger ever could. For the first time in years, I disappeared. No calls, no statements, no explanations. I let my absence do what my presence always had, expose the truth. From the outside, everything looked stable. Meetings continued. Emails flowed. Smiles were practiced. But stability without understanding is fragile. And I had been the one holding the understanding together. Small things began to slip. A deadline here. A miscommunication there. A decision delayed because no one wanted to own it. People compensate when balance disappears. They over-explain. They over-control. They mistake motion for progress. I watched it all quietly, patiently. I wasn't angry. Anger is messy. Anger is obvious. I was something far more dangerous. I was observant. Late at night, I replayed conversations from years past. The casual dismissals. The subtle shifts in tone. The smiles that stopped reaching eyes. It all made sense now. They hadn't removed me because I failed. They removed me because I could no longer be managed. And systems hate what they can't predict. I didn't plan revenge the way movies portray it. No dramatic gestures. No public humiliation. Real revenge doesn't announce itself. Real revenge waits. I understood something they didn't. When you remove the foundation quietly, the structure doesn't collapse immediately. It drifts. And drift is far more destructive than impact. Disappearing isn't difficult. Staying invisible is. The first week after I left, I did nothing that could be traced back to me. No emails. No casual check-ins. No subtle reminders of my existence. I became exactly what they wanted gone. But absence has weight. It presses on systems that were never built to function alone. By the second week, I began receiving messages. Not directly, never directly. People don't like to admit they need what they once dismissed. Instead, the questions came sideways. Do you know why this process was structured that way? Do you remember who approved this change? Have you ever seen this issue before? I didn't respond. Silence, when used correctly, becomes a mirror. People start hearing their own uncertainty reflected back at them. I spent those weeks observing patterns I'd memorized long ago. Corporate structures aren't complicated. They're predictable. You remove one stabilizing force, and insecurity spreads downward like a slow infection. Managers overcompensate. Executives blame timing. Everyone else waits for permission that never comes. I watch from a distance. Newsletters, internal updates forwarded to me by people who still trusted my judgment. I didn't ask for them. They arrived on their own. One name began appearing more frequently than the others. Marcus Bell. He had been my replacement in title only. Younger. Confident in that loud, polished way that plays well in meetings. He spoke fluently, said very little, and believed strongly in visibility over substance. Marcus had never challenged. Get me directly. He didn't need to. He waited, observed, learned which opinions were rewarded and which were tolerated. When the opening appeared, he stepped into it without hesitation. That wasn't betrayal. That was ambition. The betrayal came from those who nodded while he spoke. People who knew better and chose convenience instead. Marcus began making changes immediately, reorganizing teams, renaming initiatives, rewriting processes he didn't fully understand. He needed to leave fingerprints everywhere to prove he belonged. He was building on a foundation he had never examined. I could have warned him, but warnings only help people who already know how to listen. The first major issue hit quietly. A contract renewal delayed because someone approved a version that conflicted with an older clause. No disaster, just a delay. But delays raise questions. Then another, and another. Each small failure alone was forgivable. Together, they formed a pattern. That's when the emails changed tone. Not, "Do you remember?" anymore. Now it was, "Can you take a quick look?" Just your opinion. Off the record. I still said nothing. At night, I reviewed documents I still legally owned. Frameworks I designed. Safeguards I'd built that were now being bypassed because they were seen as overcautious. Experience is often mistaken for fear by people who've never cleaned up their own mistakes. Marcus started holding longer meetings, adding more people, seeking validation instead of clarity. He believed consensus was control. It isn't. Consensus is camouflage. By the end of the month, he made his first real mistake. A public one. He approved a strategic shift without verifying a dependency I had flagged years earlier. That dependency wasn't visible on dashboards. It lived in human memory. Mine. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. I watched the reactions closely. Some people panicked. Some denied responsibility. Some stayed quiet, hoping the problem would belong to someone else. And Marcus? Marcus blamed the system. That was when I understood something important. He wasn't my enemy. He was a tool. Revenge doesn't require hatred. It requires patience and a deep understanding of how people behave when they believe they are in control. I didn't need to destroy anything. All I had to do was stop protecting it. Pressure doesn't announce itself. It settles quietly, into voices, into timing, into the way people avoid eye contact when they realize something isn't holding anymore. By the time the issue Marcus approved reached the executive floor, it was already too late to reverse. Not because it was catastrophic, but because it was visible. Visibility is dangerous in places built on perception. The meeting that followed wasn't loud. No shouting. No slammed tables. Just questions. Questions are worse. Who reviewed this? Why wasn't this flagged earlier? Are we sure this won't repeat elsewhere? Marcus answered confidently at first. He always did. He used phrases like process gap and unforeseen overlap. Words that sound intelligent while saying nothing. But something had shifted. People weren't nodding the way they used to. Confidence works only when backed by trust. And trust, once cracked, makes even certainty look like performance. After that meeting, Marcus stopped walking the floor. He stayed behind glass more. Doors closed. Emails sent instead of conversations. He began surrounding himself with people who agreed quickly and questioned quietly. That's not leadership, it's insulation. The systems I had designed were still running, but now they were being used incorrectly. Safeguards overridden. Checks skipped. All in the name of speed. Speed impresses investors. Stability protects organizations. Marcus wanted applause. What he got instead was tension. I heard about it through old channels. People I never managed directly, but had helped once, years ago, when no one else had time. Loyalty doesn't come from titles. It comes from memory. They told me meetings felt heavier now. That decisions took longer, but were weaker. That Marcus asked for my old files more than once. He never reached out to me. Pride is expensive. The second crack came from somewhere unexpected, a junior analyst. Quiet. Precise. The kind of person leadership ignores until they're forced to listen. She noticed discrepancies stacking up. Patterns that didn't align. Reports that told different stories depending on who presented them. She didn't accuse. She documented. Documentation is lethal. When her findings surfaced, Marcus tried to redirect. Claimed legacy systems were to blame. Suggested inherited inefficiencies. A subtle attempt to point backward without naming me. But here's the problem with rewriting history. Too many people remember it clearly. Someone asked a simple question. Wasn't this addressed before? The room went still. Names weren't spoken, but I felt mine move through the space like a draft. You don't have to be present to be remembered. Sometimes absence sharpens the outline. Marcus adjusted, smiled, said, yes, but we're modernizing. Modernizing without understanding is just demolition in a suit. That night, he sent his first indirect message, through a mutual contact. Just checking how you've been. Hope all's well. I didn't reply. Silence again. But this time, it worked differently. That night, he sent his first indirect message through a mutual contact. Just checking how you've been. Hope all's well. I didn't reply. Silence again. But this time, it worked differently. Now it wasn't confusion they felt. It was awareness. They were beginning to understand that what they lost wasn't just a person. It was structure, judgment, a kind of quiet prevention that only shows its value once it's gone. The third issue arrived faster than expected. A partnership misalignment. Small on paper, large in implication. It created friction with a client who remembered working with me. They asked for a familiar name. Marcus offered assurances instead. Assurances don't replace trust. By the end of the quarter, numbers were still acceptable, but morale wasn't. And morale leaks before performance ever does. People talked more in corners. Meetings ended without clarity. Decisions were made twice, sometimes 3 times, by different people. Control was fracturing. And the board noticed. They didn't panic. Boards never do. They observe. They wait. They ask for summaries. Then deeper summaries. Then independent reviews. Marcus began preparing narratives instead of solutions. That's when I knew he was losing. Revenge doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like someone realizing, too late, that the ground they're standing on was never solid without you reinforcing it. I still hadn't moved. Not publicly. But the story had started telling itself now. All I had to do was let it continue. Control doesn't disappear suddenly. It leaks. It leaks in tone, in posture, in the way people stop asking for approval and start informing instead. Marcus noticed it first in small things. Meetings that used to wait for him now began without him. Decisions he once signed off on were already halfway executed by the time they reached his desk. People said, "We assumed you'd agree." Assumption is what happens when authority weakens. The board requested an NAL audit. Not aggressive, not alarming. Just routine. That word has ruined more careers than any accusation ever has. Marcus spent nights crafting explanations instead of fixing systems. He delegated reviews to people who lacked context, then corrected their work, then blamed delays on them. A cycle of inefficiency disguised as leadership. The audit team was polite, professional, curious. They asked questions Marcus wasn't prepared for, not about outcomes, but about process ownership. Who originally designed this framework? Why was this control removed? What was the rationale behind this override? Rationale requires memory, and memory was no longer on his side. Files pointed backward. Emails carried timestamps. Decision trails didn't match the official narrative. The more Marcus tried to simplify, the more complicated it became. He began dropping my name casually. Too casually. Back when Victor handled this. Victor had a different approach. We've evolved since Victor. Evolution implies improvement. The data didn't support that. One of the board members, quiet, observant, asked a question that landed harder than intended. Did performance issues begin before or after Victor left? No one answered immediately. Silence again. Marcus cleared his throat and spoke about transition phases, adjustment curves, growing pains. All valid concepts, when backed by results. But the numbers didn't show growth. They showed erosion. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for me. Not professionally. Personally. Old contacts. Old numbers. LinkedIn messages drafted and deleted. A pride battle he was losing internally even as he tried to maintain composure externally. Finally, he sent a message. Not an apology. Not an offer. A question. Would you be open to a conversation? I read it once. Then again. Timing matters. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because desperation speaks louder when unanswered. And I needed the board to hear it too. Meanwhile, the junior analyst, the one who documented instead of accusing, was asked to present again. This time to a larger group. Her voice didn't shake. She walked through patterns. Dependencies. Missing checks. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who had removed what. Marcus watched from the side of the room. Not leading. Observing. A dangerous position for someone used to control. After the meeting, he tried to Riga. In ground. Scheduled one-on-ones. Sent motivational emails. Talked about unity and vision. But unity can't be forced. Vision can't be pasted over cracks. People were already adjusting to a future where Marcus wasn't permanent. The board asked for contingency plans. That's corporate language for options. Marcus knew what that meant. He called me again. this time directly. I let it ring. Revenge isn't cruelty. It's symmetry. He once removed me quietly, efficiently, without conversation. Now the system was doing the same to him. Still, I wasn't finished. Because collapse wasn't my goal. Understanding was. The audit report was finalized. Not damning, just honest. Honest reports end careers softly. No drama, just inevitability. Marcus was asked to take time. Temporary leave. Strategic pause. Words designed to preserve dignity. He packed his office slower than most, as if moving carefully might change outcomes. He looked at walls where confidence once lived. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be, because now the question wasn't whether he failed. It was why he failed, and every path led back to the moment he thought removing me was safe. Revenge had reached its midpoint. The fall wasn't loud, but it was irreversible. Time off does strange things to people who confuse motion with power. Marcus started waking up early with nowhere to go. The habit stayed, but the purpose vanished. He read industry news obsessively, refreshing feeds as if relevance might return if he caught it quickly enough. Emails slowed. First the urgent ones stopped, then the informational, then even the courtesy replies. Silence doesn't arrive empty. It arrives full of meaning. The company announced an interim structure, temporary leadership, cross-functional oversight. Words carefully chosen to avoid saying what everyone understood. Marcus was no longer essential. And that was when the board reached out to me. Not publicly, not dramatically. A neutral message from an old acquaintance who now sat on the other side of authority. We're reviewing legacy systems. Your name came up. Legacy. Funny how something becomes legacy only after it's missed. We met in a quiet conference room, glass walls, muted light, no logos visible. Power prefers anonymity when it wants options. They didn't ask me to return. They asked me to advise. Temporary. External. Clean. I listened more than I spoke. Let them owe you. T-line problems I had solved years ago. Let them rediscover conclusions I already knew. When they finished, I said one sentence. You didn't lose performance. You lost memory. That landed. Advisory roles come with distance. Distance comes with clarity. And clarity makes politics visible. Marcus wasn't informed. Not officially. But news travels faster than policy. He found out the way people in his position always do, through absence. A meeting he wasn't invited to. A name mentioned without context. A decision already finalized. He called me again. This time I answered. There was a pause when he heard my voice. Recognition mixed with something else. Not anger. Relief. I hear you're involved, he said. In a limited capacity, I replied. He exhaled. Not loudly. Just enough to give himself away. We should talk, he said. There's been a lot of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is a word people use when facts stop cooperating. We met days later. Neutral ground. Public space. No witnesses who mattered. He looked older. Not physically, internally. Like someone who had been arguing with reality and lost. I didn't expect this, he said, gesturing vaguely, as if the situation itself were impolite. I know, I replied. He waited for accusation. I didn't give him one. Instead, I said something worse. You thought removing me removed the need for me. His jaw tightened. I made decisions based on what I thought was best for the company. I did too, I said. That's the difference. He leaned back. Defensive posture fading into resignation. They're not going to bring me back, are they? He asked. That question mattered. Not because of the answer, but because he was finally asking the right person. They don't need to, I said. They've already moved on. Silence stretched. Then, quietly, is there anything I can do? That was the moment. Not power asking power. Not rival challenging rival. A man asking relevance. I could have ended him there. Let the system finish its work. Let history record him as a transition error. But revenge isn't about destruction. It's about balance. There is one thing, I said. His eyes lifted. Step aside cleanly. No interference. No shadow decisions. Let the reset happen fully. He studied me, searching for motive. And you? He asked. I stay temporary, I replied. That's the agreement. He nodded slowly. For the first time, Marcus didn't negotiate. He accepted. Weeks later, the company stabilized. Systems aligned. Processes tightened. Performance didn't spike, but it stopped bleeding. That's how real recovery begins. Marcus announced his departure soon after. Personal reasons. Mutual respect. Gratitude all around. The narrative was gentle. It always is, for those who cooperate. On my final advisory day, I walked past his old office. Empty, clean, already repurposed. I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Because revenge isn't loud. It's precise. And it was almost complete. After my advisory role officially ended, nothing dramatic happened. No farewell email. No speech. No acknowledgement beyond a quiet handshake from someone who understood what had been fixed and why. That's how real influence exits, without footprints. I returned to a routine I hadn't realized I missed. Mornings without urgency. Afternoons without meetings pretending to matter. Time stretched differently when no one was pulling at it. For the first few weeks, I heard nothing. Then small signs began appearing. An article praising the company's remarkable stabilization after a turbulent period. A panel discussion where someone referenced previous leadership oversights without naming names. An industry rumor about Marcus, consulting briefly, unsuccessfully, then fading from serious conversations. Not ruined, just done. People often misunderstand revenge. They imagine collapse, public humiliation, loss so dramatic it becomes legend. But legends are noisy, and noise fades. What lasts is absence. Marcus didn't disappear because I pushed him. He disappeared because once removed from authority, there was nothing underneath holding him upright. Power had been his posture. Without it, he slouched into irrelevance. One evening, months later, I received a message from him. No subject line, just a few words. I didn't realize how much of it was you. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I didn't either. Not at first. He responded almost immediately. Do you ever regret not fighting harder when it happened? I considered that carefully. No, I typed. Fighting keeps you tied to the moment. Leaving lets time work for you. There was a long pause. Then, you won. I didn't correct him. Because winning wasn't the point. The point was alignment. Restoring the order that had been disrupted when ego overestimated itself. Revenge had already done its work quietly, without consuming me. That's the part people never talk about. The best revenge doesn't poison you. It doesn't demand obsession. It doesn't require you to become smaller. It simply repositions you where consequences can find the right person. Months later, I started something new. Smaller, sharper, built on the mistakes I'd watched others make. I chose partners carefully, systems deliberately, silence strategically. People asked why I never spoke publicly about what happened. I always gave the same answer. Stories don't need witnesses to be true. Marcus moved cities, changed industries, became careful with words. Less certain, less loud. We never met again. We didn't need to. Because revenge isn't an act. It's a correction. And once corrected, life moves on, cleaner, quieter, and finally balanced.